Hello to all subscribers and listeners of this channel. This is Why Evolution is Bullshit Part 2. The multiple reasons why evolution has not been shown to exist. Numbers 1 through 6. Evolution is the hypothesis, posing as a theory, that people believe is a fact. Again, Why Evolution is Bullshit Part 2. The multiple reasons, numbers 1 through 6. And we shall continue. Number 1. Where does DNA come from? Or 1A. What is DNA? Deoxyribonucleic acid. Who discovered DNA? Well, there's technically multiple discoverers, but the three main people that are attributed with discovering and figuring out what DNA is are Dr. Francis Crick, who was born in 1916 and died in 2004. Dr. Maurice Wilkins, born in 1916, and he also died in 2004. Interesting. And finally, Dr. James Watson, who was born in 1928 and is still alive. All of them won a Nobel Prize for their discovery, although this is slightly disputed. What is DNA? Well, I'm going to go with 3 definitions. The first one: any various nucleic acids that are usually the molecular basis of heredity are constructed of a double helix held together by hydrogen bonds between purine and pyrimidine bases, which project inward from 2 chains containing alternate lengths of deoxyribose and phosphate, that in eukaryotes are localized chiefly in cell nuclei. And this comes from Merriam-Webster's dictionary. The next definition, and this one actually has the acronym all the way spelled out: deoxyribonucleic acid, an extremely long macromolecule that is the main component of chromosomes and is the material that transfers genetic characteristics in all life forms, constructed of 2 nucleotide strands coiled around each other in a ladder-like arrangement, with the side pieces composed of alternating phosphate and deoxyribose units, and the rows composed of the purine and pyrimidine bases adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine. Also, the genetic information of DNA is encoded in the sequence of bases and is transcribed as strands unwound and replicate. And this is from dictionary.com. And the final definition: a nucleic acid that carries the genetic information in cells and some viruses. And it consists of 2 long chains of nucleotides twisting into a double helix and joined by hydrogen bonds between the complementary bases adenine and thymine, or cytosine and guanine. DNA sequences are replicated by the cell prior to the cell division and may include genes, intergenic spacers, and regions that bind to regulatory proteins. And this is from thefreedictionary.com. And all of these will be linked in the description below. Now, when did this happen? This basically took place in the earlier first half of the 20th century, roughly between 1920 and 1954. Why? Many scientists were working feverishly to try to understand what DNA was, how it operated, and how it affected the lives of different organisms. How? How did they discover DNA? How did they finally figure it out? Through many decades of research by many scientists, until Watson, Crick, and Wilkins all won Nobel Prizes for discovering the DNA helix in 1953. And some basic facts about DNA. DNA is about 2 nanometers wide. If it's unwound a certain way, it can be measured to be up to 6 feet long. Its components: DNA's major components are quite complex, and more detail about them will be linked in the description below. What is DNA made up of? DNA consists of oxygen, hydrogen, phosphorus, carbon, and nitrogen atoms. Its 5 major bases are or nucleotides are adenine, guanine, cytosine, thymine, and uracil. Each of which I will not be going into detail about here, but there'll be more details about them in the description below. What does DNA do? In the simplest terms, DNA seems to be some type of biological programming that tells an organism what to do, how to do it, what the organism will look like, how the organism will behave, how that particular organism will interact with its environment, and how that organism will operate while it's alive and or in existence. Where did it come from? As in DNA. Where did DNA come from? In the universe, we have the elements that are cited on the periodic table. They all start out as atoms. Their next level of complexity is molecules. After that, we have amino acids, then proteins, then macromolecules, and then DNA and RNA. These are very complex microstructures. So here's the question. How did the first atoms of certain elements know how to fuse together to create these more complex block of material? And then, how did that complex bit of material become the next level of complex microstructure? The size and complexity difference between DNA and basic molecules. If we could scale these complex microstructures up to something that we can see with the naked eye, it becomes very evident very quickly that something is missing in the theory of evolution. Let's go ahead and imagine a water molecule about the size of an apple. So a hydrogen atom might be the size of about a grape or so. An oxygen atom might be the size of a plum. A carbon atom might be the size of an orange or a small grapefruit. Carbon dioxide molecules would be about the length of a banana or a plantain. So if you keep all these scales in your mind, then what you're going to see is a protein molecule might be the size of a fridge, a car, or a house. And then you're going to see that the macromolecule that we call DNA, if you size it up a similar way, it would be a little more than a foot wide and roughly 20,000 miles long, as in almost the same circumference of the Earth. So we're dealing with a very massive bit of material that is many millions of times larger or longer than the next most complex molecules. Now again, the atoms and molecules have no brain, they have no thought, they have no senses, they have nothing. How would something scaled to the size of an apple over time become something so massive that it could stretch almost around the entire circumference of the Earth? Each one of these molecules is still tiny compared to the length of the DNA molecule. The size difference between an apple, a fridge, and something 20,000 miles long is huge. The size difference between a DNA molecule and something like a water molecule is too vast. So again, the question is, how does that massive change occur on its own? Where would the DNA molecule come from when it so outstrips the other microstructures in size and complexity? Someone explained how millions of years ago, each molecule somehow increased its size and complexity when it comes to the existence of these incredibly interesting microstructures. Also, how did it get inside the matrix of different organisms? How does DNA form and how did it first insert itself into the matrix of an organism? DNA has to have formed before the first organisms. But how did it construct the rest of the organism's body around it? And how did it survive without a protective body of the cell? Or did the cell form somehow separately? without the DNA, then they merged. Number 2, the biological levels of organization. The levels of organization in life are as follows, and this will also be linked in the description below. We start off with atoms, molecules, macromolecules, DNA, organelles, cells, tissues, organs, organ systems, organisms, populations, communities, ecosystems, biomes, and then a biosphere. Questions. It seems that the evolutionists / Darwinists say things along the line of, it just all came together at random, or all this organization came together randomly, or biological life began existing by chance. Well, there's a couple of problems with that. How can we have a random ordering of complex things? Randomness and order are almost the exact opposites. If we have randomness, we have no order. If we have order, then things can't be at random. It's one or the other. Yet, evolutionists / Darwinists want everyone to believe that up to 15 different levels of organization on only one planet somehow manifested by chance hundreds of millions of years ago. Such complex and hierarchical order came together by chance. Really? Number 3, the resilient little microbe. Panspermia doesn't explain the origin of organic life. Panspermia only explains how life might have gotten to planet Earth. A. Panspermia is the hypothesis that on planet Earth, or that planet Earth was seeded by a life form that came from space. The general idea is a comet or an asteroid had microorganisms on it. That stellar object crashed onto Earth, and it brought with it the microorganisms that survived the cold of space, survived the vacuum of space, survived the intense radiation of the sun. It survived entry into a much older, thicker, and denser atmosphere of the Earth. It survived an impact of an object slamming into the Earth, and the object was headed towards the Earth at velocities of up to 20,000 miles per hour. It survived the subsequent explosion resulting from that impact, an explosion that would have been many times more powerful than Tsar Bomba, and Tsar Bomba was one of the largest explosive devices ever detonated. It got onto planet Earth after surviving all that. It then multiplied itself, then slowly, generationally, became a multitude of organisms that we see on the planet today. Wow. That is a resilient little microbe. That's one resilient little microbe to survive all that. And let's say it did survive all that. Fine, let's say it did survive all that. B, that still doesn't explain some of these other things. It doesn't explain where did that organism originate from? How did it escape from that planet or other object's atmosphere? How did it get into space? How did it survive in space, wherever it came from? Then how did it get onto the asteroid or the comet that came to planet Earth? Especially when one considers space objects are cold, they're bathing in radiation, they have no atmosphere, and are moving through space at supersonic speeds, anywhere from 10 to maybe 100,000 miles per hour. How did that organism stay on the comet / asteroid for so long before getting to our solar system? Panspermia fails at explaining any of this. Panspermia explains none of this. It doesn't do a good job of it at all. Number 4, How did a single-celled organism form into something more complex? When they don't have a brain, they don't have nerve endings, they don't have any gray matter or any other way of sensing their environment that would then be used to induce change. 4a. Abiogenesis disconnected from evolution. Really? Why? Why would the origin of life be disconnected from the process of life diversifying on the planet? Abiogenesis is the idea of how life began on the planet. Evolution is the idea of how life transformed and diversified on the planet. The two should be connected. Yet evolutionists/Darwinists insist that the two are very separate phenomena, without any real reason why the two have to be separated. 4b. How can microorganisms adapt to their environment when they lack the basic structure to even have adaptation as a survival process? To adapt, one needs senses, they need a nervous system, they need a brain. They need senses to perceive their environment, they need a nervous system to understand and signal about the environment, they need a brain that tells the body what to do in order to survive and better cope with that particular environment. You could say all day that organisms just adapt, and that's all organisms need to do. But they still and will always need the basic structures in order for adaptation to occur. So without those basic structures, you can't have adaptation. So that doesn't make any sense. It's very circular reasoning. Number 5. Where are the transitionals? The fossil record does not support transitional subspecies. 5a. Whenever a paleontologist looks at fossils, he or she sees the same thing over and over again. Distinct species of organism, each one seems to be fully formed into a body structure that it was meant to have. There's no real evidence of a transition in the fossil record. There's no evidence of species slowly going from one form of body to another. All that is seen is species existing, then going extinct. Another species appears, takes their place in that ecological niche. Species that seem similar but are distinct from each other. Different species of organism in each layer of strata. A really good example of this is the so-called Cambrian Explosion. That'll be linked in the description below. And again, the evolutionists and Darwinists see two different species. They see that both species appeared at different times. They see that both species existed in different layers. And that both species, that both species were found in different layers when they were excavated. And that both species went extinct at different times. Now here's the mistake that evolutionists/Darwinists make. The mistake they make is this. They say that the more recent one evolved from the older one. But they can never actually show the transition between the two. They only imply it. Then they try to push that implication as if it's a scientific fact. When it's not a scientific fact, it's only their implication. Nothing more. It's only their guess, nothing more. Number 6. How can there be so much biodiversity in such a small space? For instance, many places around the world literally have hundreds of organisms in a space barely the size of somebody's backyard. But there's different invertebrates, there's different microorganisms, there's different plants in a space that's literally maybe a couple of feet wide. How does that happen? But let's go further. A. How can the painted dog of South Africa, the spotted hyena, or the African lion be so physically different despite hunting similar prey species? And how can this prey species be so different yet live among each other? The prey animals eat the same grasses, they drink the same water, they live in the same ecosystem. How can they be so morphologically, genetically, chemically, physically and even behaviorally different from each other in a relatively small land area. Human beings have discovered around 1.5 or so million species of organism on this planet. How does this planet Earth, have such a high level of diversity? The different climates across the Earth's surface don't seem like they're different enough to create such a high diversity of living beings. 6b. Also, how can one species in a particular ecosystem be evolving while another species in the same exact ecosystem stays the same for a much longer period of time? For example, why are crocodiles, coelacanths, and horseshoe crabs the same after millions of years, yet other species either appeared, evolved, or went extinct in a shorter period of time? Crocodiles existed during the dinosaurs. Coelacanths existed millions of years. People thought they went extinct, but they were rediscovered around the 1930s, I believe, and they still exist to this day, apparently unchanged. Horseshoe crabs apparently existed during the time of the trilobite, which is hundreds of millions of years ago. If evolution is a process of a species adapting and slowly changing generationally to survive certain environmental pressures, why would this affect certain species of organism in an ecological niche and have no effect on other species that live in that exact same ecological niche? Think about that. That is all for now. Please stay tuned for the next part in the series. I'm out. Peace.